Welcome back to the table. Ryan and I just played Joan of Arc. No, not the giant miniatures game. Joan of Arc, the Orleans draw and write.
Yeah, draw and write.
Not draw like pictures. Draw as in draw out of a bag.
That's a point that confused me when I first saw this because it's called a draw and write. And if you look at the box cover, Joan of Arc is holding a quill. It almost looks like she's drawing.
She's writing.
Point of note, though, people have made comments on the cover, but I don't know if people realize this is actually a scene from the cover of the original Orleans.
Just unmasked.
They unmasked the knight, and ta-da, it was Joan of Arc the whole time.
I guess.
That's a cool little note.
Yeah, I think it is kind of cool.
It's definitely, literally a draw and write. You're drawing tokens from a bag and using those bags to write on your player board. So it does have a lot of elements in common with some other roll and writes or flip and writes. We've seen a lot of those categories. This is having you draw the same kind of workers you would draw from Orleans, except it doesn't have the bag building element. It's like a pre-seeded bag, and you're drawing those tokens out and kind of drafting them, actually.
Yeah, and you're going to be using those tokens to do a number of different things.
A lot of things.
Based on player count, you're going to draw a different number of tokens out. We played 2-player, so you draw 5 tokens out, and then each player gets to go effectively twice, and then whoever's holding the bag, who is the first player that round, gets to go one last time. But you're using those workers to do one of a few things. One, there's a bunch of standard actions you can take with each worker. Each worker is sort of assigned to a different thing. And again, if you're familiar with Orleans, this will be somewhat familiar. Use some workers to move around the map. In fact, a couple workers. Another worker to gather goods. Another worker to buy locations, which is kind of a cool aspect in the world of roll and writes or blank and writes, in that you acquire these locations and only you have access to those. So then going forward, you can draw tokens and use those locations. And then finally, they also have that beneficial deeds board, which is where everyone can kind of go. But in this game, you're doing it only on your sheet. There's a number of things in this game where you mark them off, and then the other players at the table have to cross that out so that they can no longer do it. But those are pretty well designated, so it's not terribly hard to follow.
Yeah, and I would say if you are a fan of Orleans or you're, experience in Orleans, a lot of this game just feels very natural. And I do want to say they did a really great job of that. All of the worker tokens work like you'd expect. The farmers get resources just like in Orleans. The knights let you move across the roads. The fishermen let you move across the rivers and things like that. And the things you're doing in the game are very similar. You're trying to move around the map, collecting resources by moving over paths. You're setting down those trade houses, and each person can only have one trade house in any location, so you're kind of competing for that. You're competing for the people that are scattered around the board, trying to be the first to reach certain milestones. So a lot of the things you're doing, like I said, a lot of the scoring is straight from Orleans. So it did feel, for me as a big Orleans fan, and I know you are too.
Oh, yeah.
It felt very intuitive. They definitely didn't force you to approach things differently. They actually kind of eased you into playing this game like Orleans.
Yeah, I actually think this is a very good example of, because there have been some roll and writes in the past, roll and write versions of bigger games in the past. I think this one, more than any of them, does a great job of feeling in many ways like Orleans, like Ryan just said. But mechanically, it's playing like a roll and write or a flip and write or a blank and write, because you are just oftentimes filling things in and firing off combos, getting some bonuses, being able to go over here and do a little bit more. But the basic actions that are sort of connected to Orleans is the drawing of characters out of the bag. You are not using combinations of characters.
Right.
On your turn, you're just taking one token and using that one token. Speaking of tokens, there aren't any monks in the bag.
Oh, that's true.
So that is one difference. There are monks in Orleans. Now, there are monks in this game, but they're not tokens. 3 times throughout the game, you can draw a token out of the bag and say, you know what, I'm going to use this as a monk. So you have to cross that out on your sheet, thereby losing some points, but it might give you the flexibility you need to take whatever action you want that turn. So there's some interesting sort of abstractions of what you do in Orleans in here. But the last thing I'll say is, like Ryan also said, by the time you're scoring this game, that feels very much like Orleans. Like you go through the scoring track and you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
It is almost like we just played a miniature version of Orleans just now.
Yeah, I mean, each little facet of the game is almost like a little mini game. Of course, it is a roll and write. So things like collecting resources, there's no resource tokens. You're crossing off resources in a grid, and you're getting points for completing rows. You're getting bonuses for columns. collecting and using coins is kind of the same way. You're filling out a grid, you're spending those coins. And then the cool thing is the developments or the buildings that you can build with the merchant. This is pretty standard from Orleans. You know, you had that stack of tiles that you could look through and choose one. Well, there are 5 levels, and if anyone gets a level 1, then the level 2 becomes open to anyone else. But each person chooses a building they build, and then everyone else crosses it off. Only one person could get any given building. But what's neat is there are 4 buildings for each of those levels that are pre-printed on your sheet, or you can kind of use some of the extra ones or mix it up and put out the cards. And then when you'd buy a building, you actually just take the card and put it in front of you, and now you have an extra action. Again, you're not placing anything on these tiles, but for this one, the meta, when I would draw a farmer, instead of using the basic farmer, I can now use a better version of that action because I have that card. I like using these cards. I think it really adds another element of feeling like Orleans to this draw and write.
Well, not only that, it adds a huge element of variability in terms of specific player powers, which I don't really think, I can't think of another blank and write that gives you that ability of feeling like, oh, I have my own little thing going on. And that's what brings me to one of the biggest points I want to make about this game. This is, we were saying before we started recording, kind of a Goldilocks sort of scenario. This is not a light blank and write.
Yeah.
This is not a heavy. Like when I say heavy, I'm talking like Hadrian's Wall, probably
Twilight Inscription,
those sorts of things. Those exist. Those are heavier games in the roll and write category. This is very much a medium game, just like Orleans, a medium weight Euro. And it does just enough more than a standard roll and write to make it feel that way and to really make it feel like Orleans.
Well, that's a really good segue, because here when we talk about games that we've just played, we like to talk about who they're for and who they're not for. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Who is this for? Because I think we do have the light and the heavy. And there are not a ton of that, almost like a medium weight Euro to that medium weight roll or draw and write or whatever. There's not a ton of them. And I think that this hits that category perfectly. It's a little longer than your normal roll and write. You're doing a little bit more, but it's not a big teach. It's not super heavy.
Yeah.
Especially if you've played Orleans already, the teach is maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, I would also say if you've played Orleans and for some reason you've just denied yourself the pleasure of playing a roll and write over the last several years as they've been around. And I know there are a lot of people like that. There's a lot of people who look at roll and writes and go, nah, it doesn't seem like they're for me. I want something with a little bit more meat on the bones. If you've never done that, absolutely try this, because it feels, like we said, a lot like Orleans.
We're going to say that a lot in this video.
But it is a very, I would say it's certainly a shorter game.
Yeah.
It's certainly a much easier game to set up.
Yeah.
In fact, you don't have to use the cards. You can use the pre-print, and then you're just giving everyone a sheet, and you have this bag, and you're good to go. So that's who it's sort of for.
Sure.
Who's it not for? And let's just not say the opposite of that.
Well, again, it is, like we said, that Goldilocks game, that perfect middleweight game. I think a lot of people approach roll and writes as simple, easy to teach games that they can play in between other games, almost like fillers. You've got games like Gone Clever, or even a little bit more like Welcome To. This is definitely heavier than those. I don't know that this will ever replace Welcome To for people as being like the go-to flip and write for that weight level, for bringing in new players. I think I would want people to either have played Orleans or have played other roll and writes maybe before I bring them into teaching this game, just because it does make the teach so much easier if you're already familiar with how roll and writes work, if you're already familiar with comboing, or you do these things that unlocks a bonus, you use that a bonus somewhere else immediately. Like, that combo feeling is good, but it can still be a lot for people that haven't done it before on this scale. And then also I'd say it's not that quick and easy setup. I mean, it's not hard.
Really?
Well, it's not compared to like Gone Clever, where you're just like, here's a sheet to everyone and we're ready to go. I think some people might not like that. It works for me. Personally, this is like, I'm in that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, this is
for this game.
For sure.
But I appreciate that some people might not be.
Yeah, I do think this is probably an easier route to get people who have played things like Hadrian's Wall or heavier ones to come down and do something like this. Even if they didn't like lighter ones, this brings them a little closer to a lighter experience. Or someone who's, like I said, played Orleans, the board game, but never really experienced something like this and wanted to try a roll and write, because it does really do the trick for me. I do think there are a few things that I want to point out. Ryan and I had this conversation about tracking. With a lot of roll and writes, we've run into some where tracking gets to be a nightmare. I don't find that to be the case as much here. I'm trying to think. Did you find any area on the sheet that was like, oh, it was hard to keep track of those things?
There are some things, mainly the racing elements, where the first person to get something gets it,
and everyone has to cross.
and everyone else has to find that thing and cross it up. Especially when you're talking about that, like that town hall or the beneficial deeds, where it's like, okay, I've filled that one. I get the bonus for beneficial deed number 2. Nobody else can get it. If somebody's not really paying attention or misses it, doesn't cross it off, next thing you know, they're thinking they're going to get a bonus that maybe they're not supposed to get. And the same thing could be true with putting down the trade
houses. Yeah.
Because as soon as someone does, you have to cross it off on your board. You could never put one there. And again, if you're not tracking correctly or if you just forget to mark one, you can end up in a situation where, you're cheating technically.
Yeah.
But it can really mess up your game if you're not paying attention and you're not marking those things off when you're told to. But I think that's a table situation. You just got to make sure that everyone at the table is very clear when you say, okay, I'm getting this bonus. Everyone else cross it off right now so we don't have any mistakes.
Absolutely. Take your time when you play this game. Narrate your turns. Make sure you're paying attention to everyone else's narration, because you can get caught up in like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, because you're sitting there looking while they're taking their turn at the tokens that are left. And in this game, I will say, I haven't seen it as much in other blank and rights. There is, since you're drafting these tokens effectively turn to turn, there's definitely reason to go, oh, well, he just bought that building that uses the white token, the farmer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to take that white token, because those engines, it kind of burns someone's turn if they build something, and then you're able to deny them that a little bit in the game.
It's interesting because, in Orleans, that's kind of one of the things of the game is kind of watching other players and seeing what they're doing with their boards, where they're placing their workers, trying to anticipate maybe what actions they're trying to take, if they're going to move, if they're going to build. So you're still doing that a little bit, except the action pool is limited. Although it is a little bit harder to see. You do kind of find yourself looking to be like, okay, can you reach Trade House 3? Like, could you build that on your turn, or am I safe?
It was easy with the two of us. Playing 2-player, much easier. It plays up to 5, so that would get a little trickier, particularly when you're looking at this map and trying to look at everyone. And not to mention, people might mark these quite differently. Yeah. I like coloring things in, so I really made my routes very clear. But yeah, the whole thing wraps up and you score just like Orleans. You take your trade houses and then your little special
your people, whatever,
guys that you
special
collect.
guys.
You multiply that by certain points across the bottom track, again, just like Orleans. Mm-hmm. And then it's abstracted a lot of the other things, like the goods, the money, all the other
places. You're still getting points for goods. You're still getting points for money. And you're getting points. There's a new thing, this flag track. A lot of the bonuses that you're getting, a lot of them, if you're the first to get the bonus, will also let you circle the flag.
Which are just abstract points.
Which is abstract point. You're just adding those points together over the course of the game to get a total there. So there is still a lot of different ways to score points. When David and I just played, I did beat him by about 10 points, but our strategies were so
very different. You bought so many structures, many of the buildings.
I did, because you get benefits not just for gaining coins, but you're also encouraged to spend them. So I found myself buying structures that I wasn't necessarily going to use, just to have a way to spend coins. Now, I probably could have spent them a little better if I'd actually gone out on the board and built more trading posts, because those cost coins. But those special buildings are 2 coins per, so I was able to knock out a lot of
it allowed
coins.
It allowed you to fill up both your goods and did you do your money as well?
I did my goods and my money. Those were the 2
and I didn't even come close to filling those out, but I had quite a few more trade houses on the map over here. So I didn't beat him, but I came close. It was 46 to 59?
To 59, yeah.
So yeah, pretty close. Anyway, that was our experience just having played Joan of Arc. Orleans, the drawn, right? If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll try to answer whatever we can. And as always, until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.